session. In this session, we will continue exploring the role of trust in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and I think that we will hear some new concepts that will further illuminate the topic. We have three distinguished scholars who are searching and researching this topic. Each one will be allotted about 25 to 30 minutes, and at the end of the three talks we'll have a general discussion, so please hold your questions until then. And the first speaker is Dr. Yehudith Auerbach from the Department of Political Studies and School of Communication, Ilan University, and she will speak about lack of trust as a barrier to reconciliation in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Please, Yehudith.
Good afternoon. I would like to start with thanking the organizers for inviting me to this very important conference. And I don't know what about you, but throughout the conference and the sessions I've attended till now, I had this very strange feeling. Do you hear me, or should I just focus my speaking in here? Of oscillating between optimism and pessimism. Well, you can't hear me, so I will try my best. With every speech, we were like tilted. I felt like tilted. Oh, there is hope. Everybody here wants peace and reconciliation. On the other hand, wow, no chances, no prospects. Okay, thank you. We'll see what is better. And the same feeling was with me and accompanied me when I had done this project about lack of trust as a barrier to reconciliation. Because when I started the project, reconciliation was very a la mode. I mean, everybody spoke about reconciliation. You can check the textbooks in political science and conflict resolution studies, and you will see everybody spoke about reconciliation. Nowadays, nobody speaks about it anymore. So what does it going to say? That we are so desperate about the chances for reconciliation, or maybe a peace agreement is so close that let's focus about the peace agreements and not reconciliation. I really don't know, and I don't know, I'm not sure we will know by the end of my lecture. Let's see. So let's see what will be the best. And my research questions are: what are the prospects for reconciliation in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and what is the role of trust in this process? In order to, because we are dealing with trust, I think the best thing for trust is transparency, as was said before yesterday. So I will going to be very transparent about my plan. And this is the plan of my talk. I will start with definitions of the central concept of my presentation: reconciliation, identity conflict, trust, meta-narratives, and national narrative. Reconciliation pyramid. I will introduce the concept of reconciliation pyramid, assumptions and stages. I will speak a moment about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as an identity conflict. Everybody knows about it, so that doesn't need to be elaborated upon. I will present my methodology, the questionnaire, the list of interviewees, and then the main findings, and then the conclusions. So let's start with definitions. Reconciliation, as we all know, has so many definitions. There are a lot of debates what reconciliation is really and what it is not. And among all the definitions prevalent in the literature, I have built my own one. It's not very original, but it's still my own. And my definition goes as you can read. Reconciliation is a conflict-ending process, and I am emphasizing a specific word. It's a process, not an event, starting usually after a formal agreement has been reached between two or more adversaries in an identity conflict, which consists of a series of psychological, cognitive, and political moves aimed at bridging the narrative gaps between the two adversaries and infusing their relations with mutual trust and security. So the emphasis goes on, falls on the word process. It comes after a formal peace agreement has been concluded, which doesn't preclude the possibility that we start it while the conflict is still goes on, but it will not materialize and it will not culminate unless there was a formal peace agreement reached between the sides. And I relate also to words that had been said yesterday, mainly by Professor Avineri, who says that trust is not a necessary condition for conflict resolution. Yeah, I agree. Maybe it is not necessary for conflict resolution, but as I will try to show, and the empirical finding will help me by that, it is necessary for reconciliation, which is a much broader concept. We will also elaborate on the words narrative gap, and I will make a specific distinction between national narrative and meta-narrative. This will be done in a moment. I say also that reconciliation, can you see this below? Reconciliation is needed in an identity conflict because I make a distinction between material conflicts and identity conflicts. A material conflict is a kind of conflict which evolves around material resources, water and borders and security and demography and so on and so forth. I am not sure that reconciliation is needed really in a material conflict, but I argue that it is really needed in an identity conflict. What does it mean, an identity conflict? A conflict in which at least one, or more possibly both sides to the conflict, feel that the other is negating his identity as legitimacy, and this is why it is called an identity conflict, and this is a much more acute and sharp and prolonged conflict than the material conflict. Now we come to the trust. Trust is, as I conceive it, is a belief or willingness to believe, which is not less important, to believe that one can rely on the others, in our case as the enemy, because we are speaking trust in the context of identity conflict, so on the other, on the enemy's honesty, benign intentions, and readiness and ability to engage in a genuine peace and reconciliation process. So now some words about narratives. As you could have understood from my definition of reconciliation, reconciliation is a process which is aiming at narrowing the gap of narratives. Why so? Because my assumption, and not only my own assumption, is that what stands between two sides in an identity conflict is a divide of narratives, a rivalry about narrative, contradiction between narratives. This is quite well known, and I'm not very original about it, but I think I made here another point which I haven't made before, and I make a distinction between two kinds of narratives. One narrative is a national narrative. What is narrative all about? Narrative is, in another word, a story. Narrative is a story. Narrative is a story that you are telling about yourself, about your history, about your family, about your society. You are telling it to yourself and you are telling it to the world. A national narrative is a story that a national collective is telling himself. Why is he telling it to himself? He is telling it in himself in order to justify his identity, to justify his meta-narrative, to which I will come in a minute. I have given here the picture, I presented here the picture of a very famous narrative which exemplifies the point that in a context of an identity conflict, the national narrative of the two sides tend to be, as quoted from Korb, tend to be in a clash, in a collision, and the event itself, which happens in September 2000, has two different narratives, the Israeli narrative and the Palestinian narrative. The Palestinians will say, most of the Palestinians, of course we are not speaking about individuals, but the national narrative of the Palestinians about Muhammad Adua will say, of course, what happened here is a very powerless family. This Muhammad Adua was intentionally murdered by the IDF, and which is in accordance with the tradition of murdering children, which was ascribed to the Jews along the history. Of course, the Israelis, at the beginning of the story, the Israelis were not sure what really happened, and they were almost ready to adopt part of the Palestinian narrative, but as time elapses, the Israeli-Palestinians became very firm. No, of course there was not intentional murder. Maybe there was a killing. And if there was a killing, maybe it was not even the IDF. Maybe he is alive. Maybe he was killed, maybe even by the Palestinians. And each narrative helps each side to feel more just about this case, to feel more moral about himself, about his identity, about legitimacy. Of course, the same goes on for contradicting narratives about the Nakba, 48, the independence war for the Israelis, Nakba for Palestinians, and I think things are quite clear. So what are the meta-narratives? Meta-narrative are the big stories, the all-embracing framework within which the national narratives fit and which are becoming alive through the national narratives. The meta-narratives of the two rivals in an identity conflict evolve usually around 3 points of argument, 3 core issues: the national identity, the exclusive right over the disputed territory, and victimhood. 2 words about this. National identity. Who deserves the title national identity? And for a long time, I'm not sure the argument is over and the divide is over. Israelis will say, or Jewish Israelis will say, we are the national actor in Palestine, in Eretz Israel, in the promised Eretz Israel. The Palestinians will say, we are the national actor. And as it comes now to the fore, it seems that this is one of the main obstacles in the negotiations going between Israelis and the Palestinians. The insistence of our Prime Minister, Bibi Netanyahu, that the other side will recognize Israel as a Jewish state, which the Palestinians till now wouldn't grant to the state of Israel. So this is one issue. The second, of course, very important issue, to who has the rights, the legitimate rights over the disputed territories. Is the disputed territory, in this case Palestine or Eretz Israel, ours? Is the Jewish one, or is it a Palestinian and the other one is only a colonizer or something like this? The third point is a very important, in my eyes, a very important point, and it gets more and more important. And the question here is, who is a victim and who is a victimizer? There is a big argument about it. We think, the Jewish side think, we are the victimizers, the ultimate victims, and the Palestinians think, of course, the opposite. And the relations between the national narrative and the meta-narrative, I think, is of course reciprocal and mutual. The meta-narrative is, as I said, the ethos, the base of the ethos, and the base of justification for our being here. But it needs, in order to be disseminated in each side, it needs the national little stories concentrated around an iconic figure, an iconic event in order to become alive, in order to be able to be transmitted to the younger generation. You cannot tell the younger generation, you know, we have the right to Eretz Israel. No, you will tell the story of the immigration of the people of Israel, children of Israel coming from Egypt and coming to Israel, and we had these old stories with Masada, with Trumpeldor. This is a way that the meta-narrative is becoming alive, concrete, and this is a way you transmit it, and this is a way you make the conflict between the two sides very, very hard to solve, because everybody sticks to his meta-narrative and is helped by the national narrative which give it life. Okay, now how do you answer this question that I put as the first research question? What are the prospects for reconciliation? You have to fragment, you have to dissect, you have to show what is reconciliation built of. I will skip the assumptions, the theoretical assumptions. They are important, but I want to go immediately to my pyramid. I have conceived of the reconciliation process, it is a process we said, yeah, as a pyramid built of 7 rungs. I'm not sure this is 7 and not 8 or 7 and not 9, but I think these are really the 7 very important rungs that one on each side has to climb in order to get to achieve a real reconciliation. I will say a word about each of the stages and why it is in the shape of a pyramid. The first stage is to be acquainted with the clashing narrative, to be acquainted with the narrative of the other. I will say more than that, to be acquainted with the fact that what you tell yourself is also a narrative. I mean, not only to know the narrative of the other and call it, oh, this is a narrative, but to be aware of the fact that what you are telling yourself and describing to yourself as if it is real history, it is also a narrative. So this is a first stage. Unless you are ready to take this stage, this one, you are not ready for reconciliation. Next to it is acknowledging the other's narrative. Acknowledging the other's is more than to be acquainted with the other. It granting it a bit of authenticity and legitimacy. Not only I know what you are calling 48, that you are calling the 48 war a Nakba, but I even grant you, I give you, I lend you some of legitimacy to call it a Nakba, to see it as a catastrophe, which was not very self-evident in Israel like 20, 30 years ago. Now it's more, it's becoming more accepted. Then we have the more warm element to feel empathy. Unless you go through the first two, you cannot feel empathy. You have first to be acquainted and to acknowledge, and then you can feel empathy. And then you are maybe prepared to give reparation, which is more the role of the decision makers. And then you are maybe ready to take responsibility for the suffering of the other. And then you are maybe even ready, somebody mentioned apology, to apologize, to ask for forgiveness for the evils that you have done to the other. And in the end of the story, you are ready to incorporate the other's narratives and meta-narrative into your own, and then you are really reconciled with the other. It's in the shape of a pyramid because my assumption is that at the beginning it's easier and more widely accepted or more acceptable to broader layers, strata of the society. As you move up toward the end, it's becoming more and more difficult and less acceptable to the public, to elite, to policymaker, and that's exactly what I wanted to check with my interviewers. So, one moment. I will put this aside for a moment. I will skip some just to. Sorry. Yeah, a word about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. As we said before, I distinguish between material and identity conflict. I think you would agree with me that although the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has some very tangible material elements to it, I mean the rivalry about territory, about borders, about Jerusalem, about security, and so on. The main issue is the identity issue. The fact, or the perceived fact, that each side feels that his legitimacy as a national actor is a sovereign national actor deserving a sovereign state. This right is negated, is denied by the other. This makes the Palestinian-Israeli conflict so sharp, so acute. So, coming to the empirical part of my presentation, this is very hard to read, so I will go through the 10 questions very quickly. What I've done is like this. I have chosen 20 elite people, elite members from the Israeli side. Why elite members? Because elite members are considered epistemic authorities. People tend to listen to them, and people tend to trust them, unlike with the politicians that they don't trust, and you've mentioned it yesterday, but the elite members are trusted. At least each elite member, which I will present in a minute, has his constituency, his group, larger or smaller, of people who will listen to him carefully and will try to understand and even to support his position. That's why I chose to focus on elite members. I will skip here. Why elite members? Here you have the reason which I presented a minute ago. Now back to the questions. My methodology was qualitative, not quantitative, but qualitative. It was centered on a semi-structured, half-structured questionnaire, which I put before the 20 people which I interviewed. What does it mean, semi-structured? It means that I had these 9 questions extrapolated from the pyramid, built upon the pyramid. Yeah, to what extent are you ready to be acquainted with, acknowledge with, give restitution to, apologize to? These are the essence of the question. So this was this was the core. The pyramid served as a core, the base for the 9 questions, which were identical, but with each one I sat for 2 hours approximately, and they had a lot of room and a lot of space to answer or not to answer, to add some points which were not raised by my questionnaire. So in that sense, it was semi-structured and not full structured. How much? 10 minutes? I think I will manage. Okay, thank you very much. I bought my own watch, you see, to be my own policeman, but it's good if you are here to do it. Who are the people? That I interviewed? You have the list. It's here on the next slide. All the roles ascribed here to the people are the roles of the people I interviewed at the time of the interview. Some has different roles now. For example, Yaakov Margi was at the time of my interview a minister. He's not a minister anymore. He's a member Knesset and so on and so forth. So there are changes, but these were elites. They came from 5 groups. I chose, I will not say representative, but delegates of 5 elite groups. What are the elite groups I focused on? Religious person, authors, academics, politicians, and what else? Journalists, did I say? So journalists. And these are really the principal or not, very important people among each of in each of this group. You have the name. I will go over to the other. Here you have all the names. It's Achimeir and Dekel and Meged. If you wish, I can read it name by name, but I think it's Chaval al Azman. Okay. So what are my main findings? If I wanted to be optimistic, I'm less optimistic after my finding. It's quite disenchanting after I've concluded in terms of prospects for reconciliation. I divided roughly the interviewees between reconciliation pursuers and reconciliation avoiders. It's not a dichotomy, it's more a continuum, but I was quite sad to find out that most of my interviewees were on the avoiding part and not the pursuer part. I mean, there is the ultimate reconciliation avoider, the late Rabbi Yosef, to whom I will come in a minute because he plays a very important role, I think, and I will speak about it in a minute. I will come to it back. And funny to say, but the ultimate reconciliation pursuer sits here among us, and this is Professor Galia Golan. I didn't know she will attend the same session as I am, but I picked her up as a very good candidate, as an academic, an excellent academic, and she turned to be the ultimate reconciliation pursuers, which means that she was maybe the only, Professor Menachem Klein and also Eyal Meged went along with her through all the stages of the pyramid. And you still abide by this, yeah? From acquaintance to acknowledgement to empathy towards the Palestinians, and all the stages from beginning to the end. But most of my, I have no time to elaborate on each of them, but very many were more avoiders than pursuers. So I had a question for myself. I didn't ask them, but I found from the interviews. I had a very big question to myself. Assuming that, except for Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, everybody wishes reconciliation, wants reconciliation, aspires for reconciliation, so how do they resolve the dissonance which should be created in themselves between their aspiration to reconciliation and their unreadiness to take all the steps towards reconciliation? I mean, on the one side, yeah, I want to reconcile, I want peace, I want viable faith, I want lasting peace. But on the other hand, are you ready to acknowledge? No. Are you ready to show empathy? No. Are you ready to restitution? No. Are you ready for apologizing? No. So how can it? How do things go along with each other? And I found that they used mainly 3 techniques for coping with their alleged dissonance. They don't admit that they have a dissonance, but I assume that they have. And these 3 techniques, I call them value neutralization, object decollectivization, and epistemological differentiation. Sorry for the hard words. Okay, what do I mean by each of them? Value neutralization. Most of my respondents said, okay, we are not the evil part. This is they who are the evil part. If we made harm, if we caused harm, it was not intentionally. It was not, and I'm not taking sides now. I'm just describing, okay? But they were neutralizing the moral aspect of their behavior. So once you are exempt of blame and of guilt, you don't have to repent and to think what can you do in order to correct the evil. I mean, you don't have to apologize, you don't have to offer restitution because you are not the one to be blamed. You may have made, or your leaders, mistakes out of stupidity, out of short-sightedness, but not evil, not you. They are the evil one. The second technique I called object decollectivization, and this was used by almost all of my respondents. Because how can you conceive of yourself a human and moral creature if you're not ready to show empathy? Yeah, this is in contradiction, no? So they were decollectivizing the other side. What do I mean? For the Palestinians as individuals I have all the empathy. I have also readiness to apologize, to give restitution, operation, you name it. But for the Palestinians as a collective, nothing, nothing. And I will explain it in a minute in terms of trust. How? 5 minutes will do, I think. And the third technique, I called it epistemological differentiation. This means that everybody was acquainted with the other story, but almost all of them, or very many among them, said, our story is his story, is a real story. Their story is a falsified narrative. So once I am right, the truth is on my side, and they have invented their identity. Yeah, they have invented their story in order to murder, in order to throw us into the sea, in order to do all the evil things they are doing. So with these three techniques, you are not making any effort to reconcile because, as I explained, the dissonance is solved, so nothing has been. Dissonance is a very catalysator for attitude change. Once you have solved the dissonance with these three techniques, you don't need attitude change. And reconciliation is everything is about attitude change. You have to change your attitude in order to get to reconciliation. But once you solve your dissonance in other ways, the ways I mentioned before, you don't need to change your attitude. I said I will say a few words about Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. This is 1 moment will suffice. Rabbi Ovadia Yosef was a very interesting case. First of all, I couldn't interview him. I don't think that anybody could interview him, and the only one that you can interview in order to get his ideas was attorney David Glass, a very close friend and a very consultant and a close friend. He helped him to establish the Shas party and a really, really very intimate friend of Rabbi Yosef, and I interviewed him for several hours. And he said a very simple thing. Your pyramid, throw it to the garbage. Rabbi Ovadia Yosef is not prepared, not to be acquainted with, not to acknowledge, nothing. They they're not in his sphere of interest. He is not interested in the Palestinians. But on the other side, he is prepared to make big concessions. And this is very important because he has such a big crowd of followers that really consider him as epistemic authority, not only in religious matters, but also in political matters. And when Rabbi Ovadia Yosef is in favor of the Geneva initiative, and if he says, I am ready to make big concessions, even in Jerusalem, in Jerusalem, even in the Holy Basin, there are people who hear and listen. So, which shows us that maybe realistically, and what is the reason behind this apparent contradiction? The only thing which is important for Rabbi Ovadia Yosef is avoiding pikuach nefesh. Pikuach nefesh in Hebrew is loss of lives. This is the only thing which really matters to him, and don't be mistaken about it. Pikuach nefesh of Jewish lives. Yeah? But in order to limnoa and avoid pikuach nefesh of Jewish life, we have to get to peace. And in order to get to peace, we have to make concessions. Even if it means renounce part of Jerusalem and of the Holy Basin and so on, which is very important because, and very intriguing, because it seems that maybe you can be against reconciliation and against this utopia of building harmony with the other and still be in a position to affect positively, even more positively, the peace process than if I am a very idealistic utopist reconciliation pursuer. So this is important. Half a minute only to conclude, okay? This is my concluding remarks. Okay, I will just read it and it will go quicker like this. This study has presented the answers given by 20 Jewish elite members in Israel to half-structured questionnaire built on the reconciliation pyramid. These were quite disenchanting in terms of prospects for reconciliation between the two quarreling sides. The reason given by almost all of the interviews for the refusal to take the reconciliation steps, and this is important, I think, is lack of trust. This is what everybody mentioned and emphasized. We have no trust in the other side, lack of trust in the Palestinians, and fear that the latter, meaning the Palestinians, will use these steps to extort concessions and enhance their political positions. Once there is no trust and the fear that the other will exploit your concessions and your willingness to make these steps, there is no trust, there is no reconciliation, and there will be no trust because, as said yesterday, trust is also the precondition for reconciliation and also the ultimate consequence of reconciliation. Thank you.